Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging headfirst into a source stack centered around, well, a book that has fascinated, horrified, and provoked readers for centuries. Niccolò Machiavelli's The Prince.
And it's quite a stack we've got. We're looking directly at excerpts from The Prince itself, obviously, but also digging into, biographical details about Machiavelli, the man,
Right.
and examining a really specific kind of infamous historical event involving Cesare Borgia at Senigallia, as described in the sources, plus a biography of Castruccio Castracani, another figure Machiavelli highlighted.
That's right. And our mission here isn't really to judge Machiavelli, is it?
Yeah.
It's more to get inside his head, based purely on these sources we have.
Exactly. We want to pull out the core insights, maybe some surprising bits of knowledge, and just understand what he actually advised princes on, how to get power, how to keep it.
And crucially, why he thought the princes of Italy in his day were losing it so badly.
Yeah.
So this is really your guide to understanding the foundations of a work that, well, it still shapes how we think about politics even centuries later, maybe without us even realizing it.
Okay, so let's set the stage a bit. You really can't understand the prince without understanding the man Niccolò Machiavelli and his world. He wasn't some ivory tower philosopher.
No, definitely not. Born in Florence, 1469, and he was hands-on, right? A diplomat, an official in the Florentine Republic for, what, nearly 2 decades?
Yeah, from 1494 to 1512. And what a time to be involved in Italian politics. The sources, they paint this picture of Italy as just fragmented.
Total mess.
Pretty much. Constantly being invaded or interfered with by powerful outsiders, France, Spain, the German emperors.
And internally, just a collection of states, the Pope, Venice, Naples, Milan, Florence, always jockeying for position.
Constantly. Forming alliances, breaking alliances. That whole League of Cambrai thing where basically everyone ganged up on Venice, that's typical of the chaos Machiavelli was living through. Incredibly unstable, dangerous times for Florence, for Italy.
And then, bang, his own world collapses. 1512, the Medici come back to Florence, the Republic gets dismantled.
And Machiavelli's out of a job. Worse than that, actually imprisoned, even tortured for a bit before being exiled to his family place in San Casciano.
Rough.
Very. But this exile period, starting around 1512, that's when he writes. The Prince, his other major works, there's that famous letter the sources mention where he describes his day.
Oh, right, where he comes in from the fields.
Yeah, takes off his muddy peasant clothes, as he puts it, puts on his noble court dress, and goes into his study to basically talk with the ancient Romans and Greeks through their books.
It's such a striking image, isn't it?
Yeah.
Combining that brutal real-world experience with this deep dive into history.
Absolutely. And The Prince, it wasn't some long academic slog. He seems to have written it fairly quickly, distilling everything, his experiences, his reading, into practical advice.
And he dedicated it to Lorenzo di Piero de' Medici, not with gold, but with what he saw as his most valuable possession, his knowledge of statecraft.
Knowledge gained through, as he says, many troubles and dangers.
And he uses that great analogy in the dedication, the landscaper one.
You stand on the plain to see the mountain, stand on the mountain to see the plain. He felt that being out of power, looking in, gave him a unique perspective to advise a ruler. He'd seen both sides.
Okay, so context established. A practical guy, writing for a ruler in dangerous times. Let's get into the meat of it. Acquiring and holding power. Principalities. Specifically, he deals with republics elsewhere.
Right. And he breaks it down. How do you get a state, your own skill and forces, virtue and arms, someone else's power and luck, arms, and fortune of others? Or crime, basically. Wickedness. Or maybe the citizens just invite you in.
And the easiest ones to hold on to.
Hereditary states. If your family's been the boss forever, it's usually pretty smooth sailing. Just stick to the old ways. You'd likely only lose it if, a massive foreign army shows up. And even then, you might get it back.
But the new ones, or adding new territory to an old one, mixed principalities, that's where it gets tricky.
Oh, yeah. Super hard. Because when you take over, you inevitably hurt some people. You bring in soldiers, you impose new rules, costs, so you immediately make enemies of the people you've just subjugated.
And the people who helped you get power. You can never satisfy them completely.
Exactly, so they get disgruntled too. Machiavelli stresses that holding a new state really hinges on getting the goodwill of the locals, somehow.
And the sources give us a perfect case study in how not to do it. King Louis XII of France and Italy.
Oh, Louis. Yeah, Machiavelli really takes him apart. Mistake after mistake.
Like what, specifically?
Well, he destroyed the smaller Italian powers, the minor lords who could have been his allies or buffers. Instead, he made the already strong players, like the Pope in Spain, even stronger.
He brought Spain into Naples with him. Shared power.
Yeah, a huge blunder in Machiavelli's eyes. And he didn't move there himself, didn't really settle in, and crucially, no colonies. Machiavelli loved the idea of sending your own people to settle cheap, loyal, only upsets a few locals. Louis did none of that.
It all leads to that famous Machiavellian rule.
He who is the cause of another becoming powerful is ruined. Simple as that. Help someone else get strong, and eventually they'll turn on you.
So if Louis was the bad example, who did it right?
The Romans, always the Romans for Machiavelli. Their method for holding new provinces was, for him, the gold standard.
Send colonies.
Check. Cheap, loyal, minimal disruption overall. Support the weaker local powers, but keep them weak enough not to be a threat. Keep the bigger local powers down.
I'd absolutely keep foreign powers out.
Definitely. Don't let any other strong foreign competitor get a foothold. It's all about foresight.
The hectic fever analogy, right?
Yeah, exactly. Spot the illness early when it's easy to cure but hard to see. Don't wait until everyone sees it, but it's too late to fix. That's statecraft. The Romans, he argues, would even start a war proactively to deal with a threat on their terms, rather than waiting for it to grow.
Okay, but what about cities that were used to being free? Like Florence itself or others in Italy. Those must have been especially tough.
Notoriously so. Machiavelli is pretty stark here. He gives 3 options.
And only one is really reliable in his view.
Basically, yeah. Option 1, ruin them. Just dismantle the city, disperse the people. He points to how Rome dealt with Capua, Carthage. That's the surest way.
Grim. What else?
Option 2, go live there yourself as the prince. Option 3, let them keep their own laws, pay you tribute, and set up a friendly oligarchy, a government run by a few of your supporters.
But he didn't trust option 3 much.
Not really. He warns that the memory of freedom, of old privileges, is incredibly powerful. People will always rally around that if given a chance. The Spartans tried ruling through oligarchies, he notes, and it failed. So if you can't live there yourself, ruin is the safest, 5th harshest bet.
Wow. Okay, speaking of harsh.
Yeah.
What about rulers who get power through outright crime? Wickedness.
Yeah, he tackles that head-on, uses examples like Agathocles the Sicilian and Oliverato da Fermo.
These are pretty brutal stories in the sources, right?
Oh, yeah. Agathocles rose from nothing military skill, but then slaughters the Senate and rich citizens of Syracuse to grab power. Oliverato invites his own uncle and the leaders of Fermo to a feast.
And has them all killed by his soldiers. Takes over the town.
Machiavelli's point is, look, these methods can work. They can get you an empire, but crucially, they don't get you glory.
So, power, yes. Respect, no.
Kind of. He separates achieving rule from being ranked among the truly excellent men of history. He's analyzing effectiveness, not necessarily giving moral approval, but he draws a line at glory.
This leads into his famous ideas about cruelty, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well-used versus ill-used.
Exactly. Well-used cruelty, in his framework, is decisive, done quickly all at once, right at the beginning, out of necessity to secure your position. And then you stop. You don't keep it going. Ideally, you follow up with actions that benefit your subjects.
And ill-used.
That's the cruelty that starts small, perhaps, but grows over time. It's continuous, making the ruler more and more hated. Machiavelli suggests that one big, necessary shock at the start, like Borgia supposedly bringing order to the Romagna, which we'll get to, might actually be more merciful in the long run than being too soft and letting chaos and violence drag on.
It's a very pragmatic, almost utilitarian view of violence, strictly for state security.
Purely instrumental. Okay, so you've got the state. How do you keep it? What are the essential tools?
Good laws and good arms. That's the foundation.
And you can't have good laws without good arms? The military is fundamental.
And his views on what kind of military? This is where he gets really fired up. Mercenaries and auxiliaries.
He absolutely demolishes them. Useless and dangerous, he calls them. Disloyal, ambitious, undisciplined, cowards against a real enemy.
Only brave when shaking down the people they're supposed to protect.
Basically. He blames Italy's weakness, its ruin, squarely on the Italian states constantly hiring foreign mercenary armies.
That line about Charles VIII conquering Italy with chalk in hand.
Yeah, meaning it was so easy, the French quartermasters just had to mark the houses where the troops would lodge, no fighting needed. Machiavelli saw this as the direct result of Italians outsourcing their defense.
Mercenary captains are either going to try and take over themselves if they're any good,
or they're useless and will lose your battles for you. And auxiliaries troops loaned by a powerful ally are even worse. If they win for you, you're basically their prisoner. You owe them or they control you.
So the bottom line is,
the prince must have his own army. Troops made up of his own subjects, his own citizens, people loyal to him and the state.
He uses Cesare Borgia again as an example here, right?
Yeah. Borgia got rid of his French auxiliaries and mercenary captains and built his own forces. Iro of Syracuse did something similar. Even David refusing Saul's heavy armor to fight Goliath with just his sling. Machiavelli uses that as an analogy for relying on your own natural strength.
Neglecting the art of war, relying on others,
Yeah,
that makes a prince contemptible and leads to losing the state.
absolutely. He insists a prince has to be obsessed with war, even in peacetime. Study history, learn geography by hunting, always be training, always thinking militarily.
Okay, so arms are crucial. What about the prince's character? This is probably the most famously controversial part of The Prince.
Definitely. He talks about qualities people praise: generosity, mercy, honesty, being religious, and so on.
And he says,
He says, look, it would be great if a prince could have all these good qualities, but reality, human nature, politics, they don't allow it. A prince has to know how to do wrong, how to act immorally when it's necessary to keep the state secure. You can't always be good in a world where so many are not.
wow, must know how to do wrong. That's pretty blunt, but he doesn't mean be evil just for the sake of it, does he? There's a distinction.
A crucial one. It's about appearing versus being. Machiavelli argues it's incredibly important, even necessary, for a prince to appear to be merciful, faithful, humane, upright, religious. You need that public image.
But privately,
Privately, you need the mental flexibility, the readiness to act contrary to those qualities if the survival of the state demands it.
because people judge by appearances.
That's his observation. Most people see the surface, the appearance. Very few get close enough to know the real you. He uses Pope Alexander VI, Borgia's father, as an example of someone who mastered deception, appeared trustworthy but constantly broke his word because he understood people are easily fooled by a good front.
So the controversial conclusion is, being genuinely virtuous all the time can actually harm a prince.
It can lead to ruin, he thinks, whereas appearing virtuous is highly useful. And ultimately, if a prince wins, if he keeps his state secure, people tend to forgive the methods. The ends justify the means in the eyes of the masses who see the successful outcome.
Which leads directly to maybe his most famous question, is it better to be loved or feared?
And his answer, grounded in that pragmatic, maybe cynical view of human nature, if you absolutely have to choose, it's much safer to be feared.
Safer because
Because in his view, people were generally fickle, ungrateful, they shy away from danger, they're greedy. Love relies on obligation, a bond easily broken when self-interest comes calling.
the fear.
Fear is maintained by the dread of punishment. And that, Machiavelli says, never leaves you. It's a more reliable motivator.
It's a pretty dark view of humanity, but there's a crucial limit, right? Be feared, yes, but don't be.
Hated. Avoid hatred at all costs. That's the danger zone.
And how do you avoid being hated?
Primarily, don't touch your subjects' property and don't touch their women. Machiavelli has that incredibly stark line: men forget the death of their father sooner than the loss of their inheritance.
Ouch.
Yeah. So if you most execute someone, make sure there's a clear justification. Act decisively, but never be rapacious. Don't be seen as greedy or seizing property unjustly.
And avoiding contempt is also key. Don't appear weak or indecisive.
Right. Project strength, seriousness, courage. Avoid seeming fickle, frivolous, effeminate, cowardly. Make your judgment stick. A prince who is respected in this way and not hated is much less vulnerable to conspiracies.
Because the people are his best defense.
Absolutely. If the people don't hate the prince, conspirators have nowhere to turn. He gives that example of the Bentivogli family in Bologna. The people actually rose up and killed the conspirators who murdered the leader because they had goodwill towards family.
He also dives into the Roman emperors, doesn't he?
Yeah.
As examples of this balancing act.
Yeah, the eternal problem. Keep the soldiers happy because they have the weapons, or keep the people happy because there are more of them.
Some failed badly.
Emperors like Caracalla or Maximinus, they pandered to the soldiers, were cruel to the people, but weren't strong or respected enough to handle the hatred they generated. They ended badly.
But someone like Severus.
Severus was incredibly harsh, oppressed the people, but he was such a brilliant general, so fierce, he kept the army loyal and awed everyone. He succeeded, despite his methods. Marcus Aurelius, on the other hand, was virtuous, inherited the throne, and managed to rule well without being hated or despised.
So the lesson is, maybe a new prince needs some Severus-like ruthlessness to establish power.
While an established prince in a stable state might be better off aiming for the Marcus Aurelius model if possible, adapt your style.
What about actual physical defenses? Fortresses. Good idea or bad?
Machiavelli was, again, nuanced. He says they can be useful sometimes as a refuge or a way to keep rebellious subjects in check, but they're not a magic bullet.
It depends on who you fear more. Yeah. Your own people or foreigners.
Exactly. And his ultimate conclusion: the best fortress imaginable is simply not being hated by your people.
Because if the people hate you, a fortress won't save you.
Nope. Because if an enemy attacks, the people will likely join them. He uses the Countess of Forli. Her fortress bought her time, but when Cesare Borgia attacked and the people were hostile, the fortress couldn't save her regime. People power, or lack of it, trumps stone walls.
Okay, so we've got the theory of the tools. What about the role of luck? Fortune.
Ah, Fortuna. Machiavelli definitely thinks about this. He doesn't deny its power. He figures maybe fortune controls about half of what happens to us.
Only half.
Yeah.
So the other half is?
Us. Our ability, our foresight, our preparation. Virtue. He uses the analogy of a raging river. You can't stop the flood completely, maybe, but you can build dams, levees, prepare defenses. Fortune shows her real power where people haven't prepared.
And success comes when your actions fit the times.
Right. But the problem is people get stuck in their ways. If you've always won by being cautious, it's hard to suddenly become bold when the situation changes and demands it. You fail because you can't adapt.
And he has that famous line about fortune being like a woman.
Uh-huh. She favors the young, the bold, the aggressive, the ones who treat her roughly rather than the cautious and calculating. It's about seizing the moment.
And these aren't just abstract ideas for him. The sources give us two really detailed case studies where he applies these concepts. First up, Cesare Borgia.
Yeah, Borgia is almost Machiavelli's poster child, in a way, especially for how to build a state using someone else's power, his father, the Pope, and then secure it using your own ruthless ability, your virtue.
The Sinigali incident described in the sources is just chillingly detailed.
It really is. After some of his key captains, the Orsini, the Telli rebelled, Borgia was in deep trouble. His response was pure Machiavellian calculation and ruthlessness.
He pretended to reconcile with them.
Totally. Used one of them, Pagolo Orsini, as a go-between. Showered him with gifts, promises, reassurances. Lulled them all into a false sense of security.
While secretly
building up his own loyal forces.
Yeah.
Moving troops around quietly so no one noticed the buildup. Then he arranges this meeting at Sinigalia.
The sources lay out the scene, the town, the river, Borgia arriving with his troops already positioned.
And as the captains he lured there, Vitellozzo, Alvarado, Cagolo, and another Orsini arrive, they're separated from their own men and ushered into a room.
A trap springs.
Instantly, Borgia's men slaughter the captain's followers outside. Inside, Vitellozzo and Alvarado are strangled that same night. The two Orsini are held for just a few days.
Until Borgia gets word from Rome that his father, the Pope, has grabbed their relative.
Exactly. Confirmation secured, then they get strangled too. Clean sweep.
It's a brutal masterclass in eliminating threats decisively, using deception. Machiavelli practically admires the efficiency.
He describes Borgia as doing everything a wise and able man should do to secure his state. He blames Borgia's ultimate failure not on his methods, but on just terrible luck, his father dying suddenly, and Borgia himself getting desperately sick right when he needed to influence the next papal election. Extreme misfortune, not lack of virtue.
Okay, the second big example is Castruccio Castracani. Machiavelli wrote a whole biography of him, presented in the sources.
And Castruccio is held up as the opposite example, in a way someone who rose almost entirely through his own ability, virtue, starting from nothing, overcoming bad fortune.
His story is pure ambition and military talent. Humble beginnings, adopted, rises through the ranks.
The biography is full of his clever tactics. That battle at Monte Carlo, using his best troops to smash the enemy's weak points. He was politically shrewd, too, playing factions off against each other in Pistoia, using betrayal to gain control.
And ruthless when needed. The Lucca conspiracy crushes his enemies, builds a fortress using the stones from their own houses.
His big victories, Serravalle, Fucecchio, are described as examples of brilliant strategy, using terrain, timing, reserves effectively.
Machiavelli presents him as someone who just got the harsh realities. Quotes attributed to him sound pure Machiavelli, like, victory brings glory, not the methods used.
Or even starker. God loves strong men because the weak are always chastised by the strong. It fits perfectly with the themes in The Prince.
But Castruccio's end wasn't battle, was it?
No, ironically, after all that, he catches a chill standing in the wind after a victory, gets sick, and dies. Fortune, maybe, getting the last laugh.
And that deathbed speech in the biography. It's interesting. He basically tells his adopted son, look, I built this big state, but it's surrounded by enemies I made. You need to make peace where I made war.
Yeah, it's a recognition that his path, constant conflict to gain power and glory, wasn't sustainable for his successor who needed stability. Machiavelli clearly admired Castruccio's sheer ability, though, comparing him to the greatest historical figures, lamenting he didn't live longer to potentially unify Italy.
Okay, so stepping back from the examples, why did Machiavelli think the Italian princes of his own time were failing so badly, losing their states to France, Spain?
He's blunt about it in the conclusion. Number one reason, military failure. Total reliance on mercenaries and auxiliaries, not having their own loyal troops.
But not just that.
No. They also failed to keep their people on side, they were hated or neglected, and they didn't manage the nobles properly. He saw the rulers as lazy in peacetime, not preparing for trouble, then blaming fortune when things went wrong, instead of their own lack of wisdom and courage. No solid foundation.
But the prince doesn't just end there with criticism. It finishes with that famous exhortation, a real call to arms.
Yeah, it's incredibly passionate. He sees Italy bleeding, suffering under foreign barbarians, and believes the time is ripe for a leader, a liberator to arise.
And he pins his hopes on the Medici family.
Specifically on Lorenzo, the Dedici. He sees them as having the position, the Pope's backing, Leo Tex was a Medici, the opportunity. He says, look at Moses, Cyrus, Theseus, great founders overcame challenges. Italy has brave people, valor in his limbs, he says, but needs a head, a leader.
A leader who will create new laws, new military systems.
And crucially, raise an Italian army led by an Italian prince. He genuinely believes this is the Medici's chance for incredible fame and glory to liberate Italy, prove Roman valor isn't dead.
So we've taken this deep dive into 16th century power politics, Machiavelli's often intense advice. What's the takeaway for you listening now?
Well, Machiavelli, he forces you to look at power, at leadership, at human behavior maybe, with the rose-tinted glasses off. It's not always pretty. It's about the world as it is or as he saw it, not as we might wish it to be.
That line about men are still the dupes of their simplicity and greed feels pretty timeless, unfortunately.
It does. And his focus on being prepared, on understanding force, influence, the gap between how things look and how they are, those ideas still pack a punch. Whether you're thinking about politics or business or, frankly, any situation with competing interests.
Right. Just grappling with Machiavelli's ideas, even through these sources, gives you a different kind of lens, maybe a sharper, if sometimes uncomfortable, one for analyzing leadership and power dynamics around you.
We've journeyed through his analysis, getting power, keeping it, the role of arms, character, fortune, ability. We saw it illustrated in Borgia's cold calculations and Castracani's ambitious rise.
And we ended with that powerful plea for a leader to save Italy, someone who truly understood the real foundations of state power.
So here's something to maybe chew on. Machiavelli says a leader needs a mind ready to adapt, to turn as the winds and variations of fortune force it, ideally sticking to good, but knowing how to do wrong if absolutely necessary for survival. How do you, in your own life or how you view leaders, navigate that tension? The tension between holding on to your ideals and dealing with the messy, often difficult necessities the world throws at you.